So when we feel awe, the default mode network in your brain is deactivated. That's cortex regions that help us think about the self. The self diminishes in the brain. You tear up when feeling awe, which is a parasympathetic autonomic nervous system response, opposite of fight or flight. You have elevated vagal tone, the activation of the vagus nerve. You have oxytocin release, a chemical that helps us connect. And then there's a little bit of evidence suggesting it reduces inflammation. And all of those physiological processes are about shifting out of the self to being open to other people and other phenomena, which I think is at the core of awe. It's like, I'm open to new things, right? So psychologically, it goes from small self to being connected to others, to wondering about the world. And that's accompanied by these physiological shifts in the body, which is really cool. It's the opposite of fight or flight physiology, which is important.
Collective Insights is a voyage through topics and technologies revolutionizing human well-being. Groundbreaking approaches for a better world and a better life await you. Welcome to Collective Insights.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Stickler. Before we get into today's episode, I want to talk to you about a protocol that I'm passionate about that I use in my practice. You know, everyone wants to slow down aging, but few are really doing it the right way. There's something I do recommend for my clients doing just 2 days a month. It's a bodily cleanse that helps get rid of old defective cells. These are sometimes called senescent cells or referred to as zombie cells. And they are shown to be related to so many symptoms of poor aging. This bodily cleanse is a supplement which contains a group of ingredients called senolytics. Senolytic ingredients help our body to flush senescent cells, helping with easier repair and rejuvenation from muscles to joints to how we feel every day. Qualia Senolytic is the bodily cleanse supplement taken just 2 days a month for healthy aging that you have to try. Now, research on aging and longevity, including a beta study on Qualia Senolytic, shows that senolytic supplementation can play a huge role in enhancing how we age. Now, to learn more about senolytic research and to try Qualia Senolytic risk-free for 100 days, go to neurohacker.com, use the code PODCAST, that's PODCAST, for a free gift with purchase. That's Qualia Senolytic for better aging at neurohacker.com. So I'm Dr. Dan Stickler, the medical director here at the Neurohacker Collective. And I have one of the seminal people that I've studied in my life that I get to interview. So I'm thrilled about that. Today, we welcome Dacher Keltner, one of the world's foremost emotion scientists. That's something you don't hear about every day. He's a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley and director of the Greater Good Science Center. I believe we've interviewed other people from the Greater Good Science Center in the past, too. A fun fact about Dacher, he was the scientific advisor behind the beloved Pixar movie Inside Out. He has over 200 scientific publications and 6 books, including Born to Be Good, The Compassionate Instinct, and The Power of Paradox. His latest book, which came out just last year, is called Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. Welcome to the show.
It's wonderful to be with you, Daniel.
I got your book. I pre-ordered it when I saw it was coming out, the book on awe, because I think it was 2018 that you published The States of Awe, and that was such an inspiring book for me.
Yeah.
In our medical practice, we ask people about their most recent experience of awe. And that's been a very telling thing for working with them.
Yeah.
Because many are just like, oh, I can't recall anything. And then there's others that are like, oh, it happens every day for me.
Yeah.
And you can tell the difference in the two very quickly. So what inspired you to kind of dive into awe? Because it wasn't a thing that many people really addressed.
And no one in the sciences that I work in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, part of it was personal, Daniel. I was raised by two parents who really, my mom taught the romantics of poetry and Virginia Woolf at a state university, and my dad's a visual artist, and I grew up in the wilds of Laurel Canyon in the late 60s, and it was just a time of awe, and a childhood of awe, and it made me feel like life had so much meaning. Part of it was personal in the sense that, when I had children, I was just blown away by birth and the growth of a human being. And then, as I write about in the book, another personal dimension to it was losing my younger brother, which really was both awe, struck me with awe and then deprived me of awe. And I had to go in search of it. And then part of it is simply scientific, which is, I do, like you said, the science of emotion. Awe is an emotion we feel when we encounter vast mysteries that we don't understand. And you can apply all the amazing tools of emotion sciences, from the study of the voice to the brain to cultural conceptions of what causes awe, and understand this. And I just thought, God, I am lucky enough to be part of a science that can look at why we love paintings and art and spirituality and psychedelics and childbirth and people who morally inspire us. So I dug in.
Yeah. The childbirth piece is one that I hear from many of the people I ask, and sometimes that could be 20 years prior. That was the last time they really recall having a state of awe.
Yeah.
And I think some of this is semantic for some people, because it's really, how do you define this complex emotion of awe?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And, science has semantics in it. We have definitions, and this one gets tricky because you have to define this state, which many people like William James thought it was ineffable and beyond his words. But I define awe with John Haidt and others as an emotion. So it's a brief state that you feel when you encounter vast mysteries, right? So you're like, wow, that redwood tree is 300 feet tall and it's 1,200 years old. Wow, that's vast and it's mysterious. How could it be? So that's the rudimentary definition of it. And then we have done a lot of really hard work that I briefly report on in the book. I would encourage listeners who are intrigued by this to go to alancowan.com, where we've done what we call a lot of computational science to differentiate awe in the realm of art and music and imagery from beauty. So beauty is closely related to awe, but it's really softer. The things that make us feel beauty, we see a beautiful field of flowers, aren't quite so vast or mysterious. We kind of understand them. We can differentiate awe very readily from fear and horror. Awe is often conflated with horror, but horror is really different. Horror is about destruction. And then there are states, self-transcendent states, that no one hasn't done this work yet to differentiate, like bliss. You read a lot of spiritual writing and people, or you think of someone at a massive dance concert, right, or a dance event, and they start to really lose consciousness of the self completely. And that feels more like bliss compared to awe. We're always aware of how you're related to something large. So we've done that work, and awe is an emotion we feel when we encounter vast mysteries.
Mm-hmm. So how do you differentiate that, though, from just happiness, wonder, joy?
Yeah. Thank you. You've just asked the question that's defined 20 years of my career. So, when I entered into the science of emotion, there's this very influential figure, Paul Ekman, who said there are 6 emotions, and Inside Out had 5 of them, which is anger, fear, sadness, disgust. And then one that didn't make Inside Out, but is in Ekman's taxonomy, which is surprise. And then they had one positive emotion, joy or happiness. In my lab, with all the tools of emotion science, physiology, facial expression, vocalization, influences on reasoning, has really differentiated. We've broken down happiness or joy into many different states, like awe, amusement, love, desire, joy, gratitude, compassion, sense of beauty, pride. And so I think there are about 10 positive emotions, and awe is one of them that I happen to have given a lot of attention to. But yeah, you can differentiate awe from happiness. Happiness is just the global feeling that life's going well. It entails many judgments. Joy is a more specific state that's close to awe. And joy is when your worries about mundane reality have been suspended for a while and you feel joyful, right? Oh, I just got done with a really hard shift at work, at medical work, and now I have half a day of relaxation. I feel a bit joyful. The concerns of reality are suspended. And that's different from awe.
Yeah, I think I heard something in your writings or in your book that fear could also be considered an awe state.
Well, it gets so complicated, Daniel. When we use words like awe and fear, it suggests to us that they're really distinct, right? Oh, I had an experience of awe, and then I had an experience of fear. But in actuality, and again, this is the work of Alan Cowan, most of the time the emotions are kind of blending, And so there are a lot of awe experiences that have fear in them, and we're studying actively what that is. I was backpacking with my daughter, Natalie. We saw this, we're high up in the Eastern Sierras, 11,000 feet, I think, and this spectacular, awesome storm came over us, dark clouds moving, and I was awestruck. And then it started to shoot down lightning bolts that were hitting close by. And I was like, oh my God, we're going to die, and I panicked and ran. And so that's a mixture of awe and fear, but we can pull them apart. And fear fundamentally is about threat, right? It's about like, I'm in danger here. These are destructive things. And awe doesn't have so much threat in it. It for the most part, is uncolored, if you will, by threat.
So if you were to define the state of awe, what would be the psychological and physiologic response that you would typically see?
Man, your one sentence questions are defining 10 years of our research. So I am grateful.
I know the stuff.
Thank you. Yeah. So, what is an emotion? It's a hard question. I've given you a definition of awe. I've said that it's different from fear and horror and beauty and joy, your question, Daniel. And so then what we do is we go and we look at what it does psychologically, and we look at what it does physiologically. And the psychological story was anticipated by William James in his writing about mystical experience. But what awe does, and this runs throughout the courses of awe I write about in the book, be it musical awe, awe in nature, awe at childbirth. Awe makes us feel small and humble. So we've documented that in lots of laboratory studies. It diminishes the focus on the self. It makes you feel like you're connected to something large, a community, a tradition at work, our historical tradition, a culture, an ecosystem. Very often when people feel awe, they feel like they're part of nature, right? So that's and then it makes your mind wonder, right? This other state that's related to awe, which follows experiences of awe. I see an awe-inspiring, I hear awe-inspiring laughter in children, which is one of my favorite sources of awe. Just like, how do they laugh like that? It gives me goosebumps. And then I, as a scientist, I'm like, well, what is the acoustics of laughter? How do I figure it out? Why do kids laugh repeatedly at the same joke, whatever it is? So it makes us wonder. So that's the psychology of awe. And then the physiology of awe, I love, and in reading broadly to write this book, I got to read one of my heroes, Walt Whitman. And late in his life, he was interviewed and he said, if the soul is not in the body, where is the soul? And I think what he was saying is like our sense of divinity and mystery and transcendence in the soul have bodily sensations associated with them. And he's right? So when we feel awe, the default mode network in your brain is deactivated. That's cortex regions that help us think about the self. The self diminishes in the brain. You tear up when feeling awe, which is a parasympathetic autonomic nervous system response, opposite of fight or flight. You have elevated vagal tone, the activation of the vagus nerve. You have oxytocin release, a chemical that helps us connect. And then there's a little bit of evidence suggesting it reduces inflammation. And all of those physiological processes are about shifting out of the self to being open to other people and other phenomena, which I think is at the core of awe. It's like, I'm open to new things, right? So psychologically, it goes from small self to being connected to others, to wondering about the world. And that's accompanied by these physiological shifts in the body, which is really cool. It's the opposite of fight or flight physiology, which is important.
That the feeling of smallness that occurs, that is awe the only positive emotion that generally creates that?
Man, now you're asking questions about things I don't have answers for. So yeah, where there's been, the field of emotion has evolved from studying the Ekman emotions, anger, fear, sadness, disgust, surprise. Then we went to the self-conscious emotions, shame, embarrassment, guilt, pride. Then Barb Fredrickson inspired us to think about the positive emotions, right? Amusement and gratitude and love and compassion and awe. And awe does have this very powerful effect on reducing the size of the self. Amusement doesn't, which is interesting. When we laugh and we're thinking things are funny, we still have an awareness of self. Pride definitely doesn't. Love does not. Desire does not. And so it may be that, I could imagine deep states of gratitude, having the small self, God, I'm so grateful that my parents gave me these interests that shaped my life. I feel grateful. But we don't know, Daniel. We don't. I love this effect of awe. I think it's one of the most important stories in this science is that awe, like Jane Goodall says, enables us to get away from the self and be amazed at things outside of the self. We need that today. And so far, it looks like awe uniquely brings that to us. You could imagine compassion doing it, perhaps. We don't know. It's a really good question.
I've heard it grouped in what some people refer to as peak experiences of awe and like a profound feeling of gratitude as peak experiences. Or is there a relationship between the two there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and thank you for reminding me of that, the Maslow, that humanistic emphasis on peak moments where we really figure out life, I'd put profound gratitude in there. Bliss, which we talked about earlier, is probably a self-diminishing emotion or self-disappearing emotion. And importantly, people writing about peak experiences and the studies of them, like mountaineering and rock climbing and at concerts and religious epiphanies, are in many ways psychedelic experiences, spirit medicine, are about awe. And the new science of awe has allowed researchers to understand, to measure it, to look at small self or wonder or goosebumps or tears. And that is now inspiring a new generation of scholars looking at peak experiences like religious, nature-based, and psychedelic, which tend to be about awe, right? So it's this evolution of our understanding through science.
So what is the mechanism behind the goosebumps or chill bumps that occur with it?
Not only are you asking hard questions that will get me to do new research, but esoteric questions that I love. I love awe, and so it's and so do a lot of people. It's as Einstein said, this is in some ways the most human emotion. And one of the remarkable properties of awe is the goosebumps, which is the chills that you get, and we've done studies of them. The chills, research suggests by Todd Thrash and Laura Maruskin, breaks down into two kinds. That word refers to two physiological processes. One is more closely attached to horror, and that's the shudder. Like, I just was in a conversation about genocides, and I shuddered. I just shook. And that's a certain physiological process of shaking muscles and certain tingles. And then there's this other chills, which is the goosebumps that you asked of, which is those are little muscles that surround hair follicles that contract to warm up the body in the face of cold, but also in social mammals, as I write about, they have those chills or piloerection, fluffing up the fur, when they face peril and they want to lean into each other and they get closer and become a collective. right? So that's interesting, which is that the shudder is really subjectively more solitary. And there are theoretical accounts of that. It's like our last resort when we're cold and so forth. We shudder just to stay alive. The piloerection is a different response where we join with others to face peril. And that subjectively is different. It's like, oh, I'm part of a larger whole. I'm with this group. I am a collective, which is very definitive of feelings of awe. And piloerection tracks awe more faithfully than shudders do. And so it again tells us we can learn a lot from studying these strange physiological responses. They tell us the deep structure of awe.
Love that. Is there a purpose behind the emotion that evolutionarily defined?
Yeah, I work stand on the shoulders of Charles Darwin, an evolutionist, and his expression of emotion in Man and Animals, 1872, and people like Paul Ekman, who took really radically new evolutionary approaches to emotion. They do things for us. That film Inside Out is based on that premise. These emotions are good for us. Sadness is good for you at certain times of life. It makes you realize what's important to you. And as our lab was like, wow, what in the world does awe do for us? And I think it really does serves two broader functions. One is probably pretty self-evident to our listeners, which is it connects us to community. We did everything that was significant to our survival socially. We raised offspring and vulnerable beings together. We shared food together. We got food together. We defended ourselves together. We are hypersocial. And awe, even when you feel awe by yourself out in nature in response to music, you feel like you're part of a stronger community. It makes you part of a community. It makes you altruistic. The second one is a little bit more tricky to understand, but awe activates systems thinking, right? A lot of our life, we move around and we're thinking analytically, which is good. Like, you break things into, very direct cause and effect relations. You break it into parts, what's the next thing I'm going to do in the day? What's my goal? What's my strategy, et cetera? And awe allows us to step back and look at the systems we're part of. Feeling awe, I understand ecosystems better. It's why Darwin, his thinking about evolution, a systems approach to the evolution of species, came out of an awe experience. So awe helps us step back cognitively and develop systems-based knowledge about the world. And that's really important, right? You think about in the context of our evolution, it would be very healthy to know the systems of migration of animals or fish or tide systems, weather systems, and awe gives it to us, which is why it's so important to science and understanding and medicine.
Yeah, why do you think that the experiences of awe are so tied with nature? I mean, that's when I talk to people, that's generally the ones that they bring up.
Yeah, and in our, we've done worldwide studies of awe, 26 countries, and nature, especially in Western Europe. It's the first or second most common source of awe, along with moral beauty, being moved by other people's courage and overcoming and kindness. And very, I would have been lucky to work with indigenous scholars for whom humans are nature. We are part of ecosystems. We are a living form. We are a species like other species that, whose survival depends on our relatedness to nature. For a lot of reasons, we've separated ourselves from nature. The great chain of being in Christianity and science does that, but we're really part of nature. And there are a lot of benefits to that understanding of the human in as part of nature. Studies, and awe gives that to us. It's important to us, right? Studies show from China, if I feel awe, I realize I'm part of this ecosystem and I eat less red meat and I drive cars less, right? I act in ways that are better for nature. And then in indigenous traditions, this was just a fundamental idea about the self. The human self is like, I'm one of many members of species. I'm part of this local ecosystem. I have effects on the environment. It has effects on me. And so I live an ethical life with that insight about the world. So very important to remind ourselves of that, which awe does.
Yeah, the nature piece has been a big one for me, but
Yeah.
it's interesting how if I'm with people, there's a different feeling that I experience with the awe versus when I'm by myself and I experience it.
What do you like? Tell me more. How does it differ?
So when I'm with a group of people and we're all in this state, the feeling of the oneness is stronger towards kind of the human collective. Whereas if I'm by myself, it's this feeling of oneness with the nature that is predominant.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, that is, we know, we don't, you're pointing to a new area of inquiry, but I think you're onto something really deep, Daniel, which is, by yourself, your mind in this systems view of the world is connecting to other systems. Like, oh, I'm understanding music. Listen to this. I'm tearing up at this music, right? I tear up at the Beatles, and I'm like, now I'm thinking about all the music, that system of artistic representation that I'm part of, right? Oh, I had all these experiences with music in an autobiographical sense, and I'm putting it together. And then when you're with people, you suddenly, what you're integrating is a sense of community in your mind, which is really different when you share it with others. And I wish we had a cool study on that. It's a really deep idea, that we need both. We need to know there's common humanity. American politics suffers from, all the polarization of like us, them, when in fact there's a lot that we share with others. Awe gets us to that idea, and we get it through shared experiences of awe. We also need to understand that our ideas and our experiences are part of nature and part of cultural traditions that you probably have a stronger insight into if it was by yourself, the experience of awe. But it'd be a great study. Really cool idea.
Is there a benefit to almost like an integration after experiencing that, talking with others that may have been present, or just sharing it with others?
We don't know, and but this is I'm involved in certain sort of social organizations that are really interested in peak experiences, if you will, right? So I work with the Sierra Club to study the benefits of nature and have a new line of work where we're looking at what national parks bring to you or give to you. I'm working with museums on and Carnegie Hall on what does music give to you in an enduring sense. Or, clearly this is a central issue in sphere of medicine, psychedelic research. You go have an experience that changes your life, and then well, how long does that last? Is it half an hour? Is it 22 years? And we don't know. And I think what you're proposing is exactly right, which is what you need to translate the experience to cultural mechanisms that keep it alive. Stories, visual montages, a piece of music, if you know how to play music, conversation in groups, and that we will see. It's, I think it's a plausible a very important hypothesis for these fields. In the West, where we're very individualistic, we spend a lot of time alone. It's interesting to me that we go have life transformative experiences. You go to a meditation retreat, or you go traveling around the world, and then you come back and you don't do anything to sustain it. You don't have, groups that carry on the conversation. Some do, some traditions do. And that is a really important next step in this awe research as it applies to peak experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is probably the most common denominator for me in the experiences of awe. I can experience it in nature. I can experience it in group conversations. I can experience in love making, and there are just so many times that bliss is the most common denominator for me for those states of awe.
Yeah. 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 I think this total disillusion of the self, of bliss, in the context you describe, is so interesting to explore. I think like it's one of these states, as we talked about earlier, Daniel, that people really haven't looked at. Scientifically, there's a lot of spiritual traditions that are interested in it. And I think it's a very interesting state, deserving of its own deep study, like I did with awe. Like, why do we have bliss? Why do we disappear? When I go to a 20-year-old goes to a rave and they're dancing until 3 a.m. and they just are like disappearing. Well, what is that? Is that, is a lot of rituals serve it. And then, you get into interesting questions about how does it benefit you? When can it be dangerous? You don't always want to disappear. You want to have a pretty strong hold in reality. So I hope so. There are scientists out there because it's a fertile territory to explore.
Yeah, I would love to see this become a highly investigated area for sure.
Yeah.
One of the ones for me, which I think helped me cultivate the experience, was being a doctor. When I was in medical school, it was just so fascinating to me the way the body worked. And then as a surgeon for 15 years, seeing that aspect of the body and understanding it from the inside out. And I was a neuroscience major undergraduate, so the brain was always a big area for me too.
Yep.
But the body doesn't cease to present me with awe. The human system in general is just out there. So what are some ways that like an individual could cultivate more awe experiences in their daily lives?
Yeah. And I just want to riff off of your observations. I remember when what got me into emotion science was hearing Paul Ekman talk about how the facial anatomy, it's 30 groups of muscles under the surface of the skin and the face, produce all these emotions. And he'd figured that out. And now we know a lot about that and vocalization and when I discovered that, and then it's like, wow, there's a chemical like oxytocin that's part of awe, and think of what oxytocin, it still to this day brings me awe. We are after the basic science, and, I always, at this age and given the crises our world is facing of mental health crises and climate crises and racism crises and mass incarceration, I always want to think about how our knowledge can help people. And so how do we cultivate awe? We have started to work on tests of different kinds. And so the first thing I would really encourage the reader to think about is, in the book, I write about 8 wonders of awe: moral beauty, kindness and courage of others, nature, collective movement, music, art, spirituality. And then big ideas, you and I love the idea of neurophysiology, and life and death, right? And in those domains, you can cultivate awe, our research shows, pretty quickly. And it just involves, and we've tested this with healthcare providers, take a minute, immerse yourself in one of those domains, listen to a piece of music, or read a sacred text, or think about someone who's inspired you morally, like a patient you've had or colleague in medicine. We just did this study with teachers. Think about a student who inspires you morally, right? Or because of their courage or overcoming. Take a minute, think about one of those domains, quiet down your context, turn off your phones, take a deep breath. And then just as you're immersing yourself out in nature or music or moral beauty or a visual image, think about what you're connected to that's vast in that moment, right? And once you do that, people start to like, wow, I'm actually part of a tradition of healthcare and the Hippocratic Oath and think about the patients I've served and helped, and you start to feel it, right? Or, we did this with teachers, and they start to think about, oh yeah, I know my work's really hard and underpaid, but I'm part of how young people develop, in this noble instant. And so that's very real. And then the second thing we've been doing, and it's just, quiet it down, put away your devices, take a breath, and connect to something vast. The second thing, we're testing more specific techniques. We did an all walk study with people who are 75 years old or older. All they did, and, in the book are instructions. It's really easy. You go out on your regular walk and you look for wonder and you look for mystery, and you also shift your gaze around. You look at small things, you span out and you look at big things. I do this all the time, and it brings awe, the small to the vast, look for wonder. It helped people who are 75 years old or older find more joy over 8 weeks and feel less physical pain, right? Which is very prominent when you're 75 or 80. So I think, and then there are other awe interventions that have been tested in China, imagery, music, quotes. This is coming. And, I hope we can bring it we designed a course for educators. I'm doing work with medical healthcare providers. We need more awe in our environments.
And I'm sure you're probably venturing into this, but I think back to the movie Soylent Green, and when they would go to the death centers to be terminated, they would show them these wondrous pictures of nature, and they would be in a state of awe as they would pass. But are you investigating using virtual reality to induce states of awe, and is it possible to do it in that state?
Yeah, I want to just note a very important thing you observed, Daniel. Like, the awe is part of the end of life, and we need more hospice end of life approaches. And I did talk to B.J. Miller and that team about how do you build awe into end of life. The experience of the end of life, near-death experiences, has awe properties. How do we cultivate that? Bereavement has awe and horror and depression, but how do we surface more awe practices, like thinking about, the morally beautiful of the person who's passed away, which I did with my brother a lot after he died, as a way to adapt and grow in the face of these inevitabilities of the life cycle. The question, what was your question again? It was
just in VR.
Yeah. There's a VR lab at Stanford that's working on awe. It is, I think, one of the great opportunities of VR is to allow us to enter into simulated worlds, where, we're underwater and we become a fish, or, I remember talking to this VR team saying, like, you got to do the VR that recreates hominid evolution and place me in different subspecies. And, it would be awe-inspiring, and think what we'd learn. So, I think I don't know the research on its efficacy. Does it really produce awe, or the thought that you're feeling awe? But I think it has a lot of promise in our search for awe. I worry about VR because it takes us away. Awe, as you've suggested, Daniel, is actually really easy to experience. If you just slow down and open your mind and you listen to a great piece of music, you'll feel a little awe, or get outdoors, or think about, how courageous people are. And I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the ready access, the direct experience of awe that's around us quite prevalently.
Yeah, I can look at my wife, and I feel this awe that I could experience love to that depth. I mean, it's just, it does. It brings you to tears, and
that's wonderful.
Everything. So along those lines of facilitation of this, I have friends that have told me that MDMA really facilitates states of awe, whether it's in conversation or with a partner, or even in nature by themselves. Do found that, or are people researching that aspect?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, the spirit medicine, psychedelic science, it's stimulated by, it was there, but Michael Pollan's book was revolutionary, reporting on Roland Griffiths and Robin Carhart Harris, and now Peter Hendricks and David Yaden and our lab and other labs. There's this sense, and typically they've measured the experience in terms of mystical experience, of boundaries dissolving, timelessness, a sense of oneness with everything, non-dualism, etc. Researchers, in particular, Peter Hendricks, David Yaden at Johns Hopkins and our lab are like, this is awe. A lot of the psychedelics are about variations of awe, where you lose a sense of self, you feel connected in deep transcendent ways, you feel really inherently interested in the good and kindness, MDMA has that quality, really about love, and ketamine, and then LSD, a little bit more about awe or conceptual states. So yeah, I think it's going to be central to the study of MDMA and psilocybin, the other psychedelic substances, and by importing this knowledge of a transcendent states, we can get closer to the mechanisms by which these compounds work, right? If MDMA is fundamentally about loving humanity, that's different. That's different implications than awe out of psilocybin, which is, wow, there are these mysteries that blow my mind. And we'll be able to chart more precise ways in which these compounds may benefit us, which is what we try to do in science.
And I like the fact that almost all of those you mentioned take the default mode network offline for a period of time.
And that's one of the big lessons of all of this research is we are too self-focused. Our kids are too self-focused. Technology is too self-focused. And we're anxious and depressed. And our challenge is to get out. As when I read Jane Goodall's quote, I was like, this is it. She's like, chimps show this response, some sense of spirituality or awe, which is really being amazed at things outside of yourself.
Yeah, 5-MeO-DMT is a very potent awe inducer that I noticed.
Yeah, I haven't tried it, but I'll bet it is. From what I hear, it's beyond awe.
Tell me,
Yeah.
So by creating or by teaching people to experience more awe, I mean, what is the societal implications of that? Because I know, people who lack hope, I mean, I can't imagine that they're even able to experience awe.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how can I work with that?
Yeah, when I published this book and the paperback's just out, I'm a lab scientist studying this, what I thought was a kind of a ethereal, esoteric emotion. And I've been blown away at the hunger for it culturally, right? So educators, and we have a course on awe for teachers and educators at the greater good in education. Teachers are writing me, like, on my best days of teaching, it's all about awe. And then a lot of the time, everything gets in the way, so museum directors, I'm working with the National Gallery, like, art was created to make people wonder and feel aesthetics and awe. And we've lost it. How do we get back to it? The national parks, we're hopefully going to be working with them on, 360 million visits to the parks a year. Often you go and you're worried about parking and you're frustrated and arguing with your teenager. You forget, this is awe, and open your eyes. So how do we deliver that? And then I do work with healthcare providers, Kaiser Permanente and others, like, all right, man, let's take a moment to remember how incredible people are when they face disease. I mean, the stories I hear from medicine astound me. How incredible medicine is, right? What we can do with the heart, or gene editing or whatever. So I think it's a great moment of awe for our culture. And a lot of the problems, self-focus, anxiety, materialism, are reduced if we turn to awe.
At what age can you generally start to kind of assist children to start to experience this?
I think, it's so funny to me, and this is why I love science, because, good science should, in some sense, be agnostic, and you just go study things. And there was this idea implicit in the literature that awe is kind of about music and culture, big ideas and literature, and it's really more of a advanced emotion, or an emotion rooted in complicated knowledge. And so, no, there are very few studies of awe in children, which is regrettable, because if that work gets going, and I want to do it, what we know is, just think about it, Daniel, like sharing awe with your child, given all of awe's benefits, should be really good for the child, and it should be a great way to parent. But we don't have data on that. I summarize an essay by Rachel Carson on Teach Your Child to Wonder. Every parent should read it. But what I will tell you, contrary to the wrong-headed assumptions that I used to have about like awe is sophisticated and needs metaphor and so forth of the mind, there's this great YouTube demonstration, not science, but YouTube, called Babies in Tunnels. And as I started to study awe, somebody sent it to me, and, little baby sitting in a car seat, they go into a tunnel and it's black. Suddenly they don't see reality, and they probably think they're dead. Like, I'm dead, and then they come out of the tunnel and it's bright, and they realize, whoa, the world's here again. And they vibrate in an expression of awe that very few adults will ever express. Mm-hmm. It's pure awe. They're, and that tells us awe emerges early, and it's fundamental to human development. And it should be part of parenting.
Well, I experience awe just watching children. When they learn something new, it's just an awe experience. So is it a shared experience, or?
Yeah, I hope on our best days it is. My best days parenting were just all about sharing awe, and imagine everything that the child learns is the result of that.
Yeah, that is an area that I would love to see investigated, and how we can do that with the foster that skill set in the children. Because in our Western society, we are so focused on the self, the ego, I, and
oh man, I was astounded parent. I raised two daughters who I'm very proud of, Serafina and Natalie, and I was raised to find awe in it. I come out of an anxious genotype, and awe transformed my nervous system, I'm convinced. And I was struck by how our culture prevents it as I parent it, you go play. I used to play games and sports just for awe, and now it was like competition, and who, the children are practicing too hard. They do volunteerism. What an awe-inspiring moment. And it turns into like, oh, does this enhance your resume to get into this college? I think we've really harmed awe, and I hope we can get back to it. And that'll take some work that you're anticipating or pointing to with your question.
Are there different neurochemical changes that are specific to the awe state, or is it individualized?
Yeah, all we know right now is reduced default mode network activity. And there's nice work in Japan showing the pleasurable forms of awe activate reward circuitry in the brain, the ventral striatum, I think. And then fearful awe tends to activate the amygdala, no surprise. But that's all we know, and we know there's one study of oxytocin release, indirect study of that. So that's work that I think the scientific study of psychedelics will really advance, right? Which is, MDMA, our work shows, tends to be a little bit more about love, and ketamine is big awe. It's just like you dissolve, you're just awestruck. So that tells us subjectively those are really different experiences, and they probably track different neural processes. And so the awe science is helpful in that regard, but we don't know. This is just a very early science that needs more work.
Yeah, we use ketamine therapy in some of our patients, and one of the things we focus on is in the set and setting, getting them in that place where they're more prone to experience awe state and like a fear state of dealing with these demons that come, and but even that can be framed in more of an awe place. So that's something we work with, and we've had really amazing experiences with our clients in ketamine journeys.
Cool. I think we really need that work.
So what's on the horizon with this? What all's kind of coming to be new?
Yeah. Well, one of them, one of the initiatives, and it just got supported by the Tien Ring Foundation, worldwide organization devoted to nature-focused contemplation. And this will be in partnership with Dr. Uriah Solidwin, an indigenous scholar who really is characterizing nature-focused contemplation. It's amazing to me, Daniel, like I teach, mindfulness practices, gratitude practices to, students and federal judges and medical doctors and nurses. It's just what I've been called into doing. And I teach people how to breathe and how to, body scans and loving kindness and gratitude. And I know the science and it justifies that. But the awe science tells us, just as your examples have as well, that nature is fundamental to contemplation. And when we have tools and approaches to immersing myself in nature, be it the sky, a sunset, gardening, growing plants, backpacking, rock climbing, walking in the woods like Charles Darwin did, this is going to be powerful, and it's relatively untapped in our approach to alternative healing, health, lifestyle choices. We know it's good to walk, but we don't have a set of practices to do it. Right? That's why we did the Awe Walk study. And so we're going to develop those. And then I'm really interested, and again, it's a response to the book. Institutions have been reaching out to me and saying, our schools were meant to be about awe, but we've lost it. Our museum, the National Gallery was meant to be about awe. People don't feel it. The national parks, And so can we use this science and the techniques for cultivating awe to bring it back to institutions? I think that's really, I'm in the last 15 years of my career. I was raised by public education and the University of California, so it's a good way to give back. And I think it's a reminder of, awe tells us like this is something we all share, and we need that. So those are things on the horizon: nature-focused contemplation and cities of awe or institutions of awe.
All right, last question here.
Yeah.
I would like to know if science is actually taking away some experiences of awe, because I can see where the unexplainable is frequently a source of awe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in some ways it could, right? So when somebody tells me but on balance, I think the opposite is true, but I think it could. So if somebody tells me, for example, well, science and scholarship more broadly have taught us that to have a belief in a spiritual force, it needs to meet these 4 criteria. It needs to transcend the laws of reality, blah, blah, blah. That takes away my sense of curiosity about the spiritual realm for me personally. But on balance, Daniel, I was worried about that. I was like, what if there's this deep irony that as we study and go after awe, we diminish its very possibility? And our research tends to find the opposite, which is the more you do awe walks, the more awe you feel. The more you immerse yourself in awe practices 1 minute a day, the more awe you feel. The studies of people who really dive into a domain of awe, just like you said in your personal example. I love neurophysiology and the nervous system. The more you learn, and you learn about gene expression and the latest discoveries of neural pruning, right? You're like, oh my God, it's even more complicated than I thought. So I take heart in our lab's findings, some of those examples to say, one of the beauties of awe, and I just kept returning to this word mystery, which is mystery, like Einstein said, is the engine of art and science and knowledge. And mystery is just part of the DNA of awe. When you have an awe experience, you're like, I know what the Sierras are. I know their geological formations and trees. And yet here I am blown away. And mystery is part of it, and it gets you to look for more. So I think it actually is science and knowledge of awe increases experience.
I love it. And thank you for contributing to an awe experience for me today.
Oh, for me too, Daniel. Your questions have been deep and generative, and I'm thinking about that parenting awe. What a great idea to cultivate awe parenting.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease, or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional, herbal, or homeopathic supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guests' qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician. This podcast is owned by Neurohacker Collective.